standing in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Morrison Associates. I held the deed in my trembling hands. The same law firm where my father had signed every major deal for the past 30 years. The same conference table where he'd dismissed my ideas countless times. But today was different. Today I wasn't the disappointment sitting in the corner. Today I was the one with the power to change everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. In just 3 hours, I'd be walking into his retirement party, where my family would once again remind me how I'd never lived up to the family name. What they didn't know was that I'd just purchased the one thing my father valued more than anything else in this world. And I was about to hand it back to him on my terms. Aplasha. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon always filled our kitchen on Sunday mornings, but it never quite masked the tension that seemed to live in the walls of our Connecticut home. I was 12 when I first understood that being a Rodriguez meant carrying expectations I could never meet. My father, Miguel Rodriguez, had built Rodriguez Construction from nothing. A Puerto Rican immigrant who'd arrived in Hartford with $50 and a tool belt. He'd turned his small contracting business into the largest commercial construction company in New England. By the time I was born, Rodriguez Construction had built half the office buildings in downtown Hartford, 3 shopping centers, and the new wing of Hartford Hospital. But success hadn't softened him. If anything, it had made him harder, more demanding, more convinced that everyone around him needed to prove their worth, including his daughter. Elena Mija, you need to understand something, he told me one morning when I was 14, setting down his coffee cup with the deliberation he used for everything. This business, it's not about being smart, it's about being tough, about making decisions when everyone else is too scared to move. I nodded, trying to look interested in his lecture about load-bearing walls and municipal contracts. But my mind was elsewhere, drifting to the architectural sketches I'd been working on the night before. While other kids my age were playing video games, I was designing houses that could withstand hurricanes, buildings that generated their own power, communities that worked with nature instead of against it. My older brother Carlos was everything my father wanted in a successor. At 25, he could read a blueprint faster than most people could read a newspaper. He understood soil composition, zoning laws, and union negotiations. He wore hard hats like they were crowns, and spoke to subcontractors with the same authoritative tone my father used. Carlos had graduated from UConn with a degree in civil engineering and immediately joined the family business. Within 2 years, he was overseeing multi-million-dollar projects and earning the respect of men who'd been in construction longer than he'd been alive. He was practical, decisive, and most importantly to my father, he never questioned the way things had always been done. Then there was me, Elena Rodriguez, the dreamer. The girl who asked too many questions and proposed solutions that made everyone uncomfortable. During high school, I'd present my father with ideas for sustainable building materials, energy-efficient construction methods, and community-centered development projects. I'd spent hours researching green building certifications and innovative architectural techniques that could reduce environmental impact while cutting long-term costs. His response was always the same, a patient smile followed by a gentle but firm dismissal. That's nice, Elena, but we build what people want to buy. And people want reliable, affordable buildings that get finished on time. All this environmental stuff, it's expensive and complicated. Maybe when you're older, you'll understand how business really works. My mother, Carmen, would give me sympathetic looks from across the dinner table. She'd immigrated from Mexico when she was 19, met my father at a church social, and had spent the next 25 years perfecting the art of supportive silence. She loved me, I knew that, but she also understood that challenging Miguel Rodriguez rarely ended well for anyone. Your father works very hard, Mija, she'd tell me when I'd complain about his dismissiveness. He just wants to protect you from disappointment. The construction business, it's not easy for women, but I didn't want protection. I wanted a chance to prove that my ideas weren't just teenage idealism, that sustainable construction wasn't just a trend, but the future of the industry. When I announced my intention to study environmental engineering at MIT, the conversation didn't go well. Environmental engineering? My father repeated. as if I'd told him I wanted to become a professional unicorn trainer. Elena, that's not a real career. That's a hobby. Carlos is studying real engineering, practical engineering that builds things people actually need. Carlos, ever the diplomat, tried to bridge the gap. Dad, environmental stuff is becoming pretty important. A lot of companies are looking at sustainability now. My father waved him off. It's a phase. In 5 years, nobody will care about any of this green nonsense. What matters is building solid, profitable projects. Elena, why don't you consider business administration? Or maybe interior design? Something that makes sense for a woman in this industry. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, just crack, like the first small fissure in a foundation that would eventually bring down the whole structure. I'm going to MIT, I said quietly, and I'm going to study environmental engineering. And someday, I'm going to show you that sustainable construction isn't just a phase. It's the future. My father's expression hardened. With what money? You think I'm going to pay for you to waste 4 years learning how to hug trees? The crack in my chest widened. I'll get scholarships. I'll take loans. I'll figure it out. Fine, he said, standing up from the table. But don't come crying to me when you realize the real world doesn't care about your environmental fantasies. And don't expect a job at Rodriguez Construction when you graduate with a degree in something that doesn't matter. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my father's voice carrying up from his home office as he talked to contractors and clients. For the first time in my life, I understood that my father didn't just doubt my ideas. He doubted me. In his mind, I wasn't the future of Rodriguez Construction. I wasn't even a consideration. But as I listened to him discuss budgets and timelines and profit margins, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would prove him wrong. Someday, I would show him that the daughter he'd dismissed as a dreamer was actually the one who understood the future better than anyone else in the room. I just had no idea that someday would begin with me walking away from everything I'd ever known and end with me holding the keys to his entire empire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. MIT wasn't just an escape from Hartford. It was a revelation. Walking across the campus for the first time, backpack heavy with engineering textbooks and a heart full of determination, I felt like I could finally breathe without permission. My dorm room in McGregor House was a shoebox compared to my bedroom back home, but it was mine. No family photos of construction sites on the walls. No constant reminders of the Rodriguez legacy I was supposed to uphold. Just clean white walls, a narrow bed, and a desk where I could spread out my architectural sketches without someone telling me they were impractical. My roommate, Jessica Chen from San Francisco, was a computer science major with purple streaks in her hair and a collection of vintage band t-shirts. On our first night, she found me hunched over my laptop, researching sustainable building materials. "Let me guess," she said, plopping down on her bed with a bag of chips. "You're one of those people who actually came here to change the world." I looked up, embarrassed. "Is that obvious?" "Totally obvious. And also totally cool. Most people here are just trying to get rich." "What's your thing?" For the first time in years, someone was asking about my ideas without that look of polite tolerance I'd grown accustomed to, so I told her. About green building materials that could reduce construction waste by 70%. About energy systems that could make buildings completely self-sufficient. About urban planning that could create communities instead of just developments. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking questions that showed she was actually thinking about what I was saying. "That's brilliant," she said when I finished. "And your family thinks this is pointless?" "They think it's a phase. Something I'll grow out of when I realize how the real world works," Jessica snorted. "The real world is changing, they just haven't figured that out yet." Classes started 3 days later, and I threw myself into them with an intensity that surprised even me. Environmental engineering systems, structural mechanics, sustainable energy. Every course felt like a piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. Professor Sarah Mitchell taught my Introduction to Sustainable Design course, and she became the mentor I hadn't known I needed. Dr. Mitchell had worked for an environmental consulting firm before returning to academia, and she brought real-world experience to theoretical concepts that made everything click into place. During office hours one afternoon, I showed her some sketches I'd been working on, a mixed-use development that incorporated renewable energy systems, rainwater collection, and community green spaces. "Elena," she said, studying the drawings with genuine interest, "how much do you know about LEED certification?" "I've read about it, but I've never seen it implemented." She pulled out her laptop and showed me a presentation about a project her former firm had completed in Boston. A luxury residential complex that had achieved LEED Platinum certification while coming in under budget and finishing ahead of schedule. The developer saved $2 million in long-term operating costs, she explained, clicking through photos of the finished building. The units sell for premium prices because buyers understand they're investing in lower utility bills and healthier living spaces. This isn't idealism, Elena. This is smart business. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Why isn't everyone doing this? Because it requires thinking beyond next quarter's profits. It requires understanding that initial investments in sustainable materials and systems pay for themselves over time. Most developers, especially older ones, stick with what they know because change feels risky. That night, I called my father. We hadn't spoken much since I'd left for school, just brief conversations about grades and whether I had enough money for food. But I wanted to share what I'd learned, to show him that my ideas weren't just academic theories. "Dad," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice, "I wanted to tell you about something I learned in class today. There's this building in Boston that—" "Elena, I'm in the middle of reviewing contracts. Can this wait?" "It'll just take 2 minutes. There's a residential development that used sustainable materials and systems, and it actually saved the developer millions of dollars. The units sell for premium prices because, Mija, that's nice, but I need to focus on real projects right now. We're bidding on a shopping center in Springfield, and Carlos needs help with the calculations." The familiar disappointment settled in my stomach like a stone. "Right, sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me, I just don't have time for school projects right now." After I hung up, I sat in my dorm room feeling the familiar combination of frustration and determination that had driven me to MIT in the first place. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't going to let his dismissal deflate me. Jessica found me an hour later, still staring at my phone. "Let me guess," she said. "Family doesn't want to hear about your world-changing ideas?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You know what your problem is?" she continued, settling into her desk chair. "You're trying to convince people who benefit from the old way of doing things. That never works. You need to prove it instead." "How do I prove something when I'm still in school?" "By finding people who want to listen. By building something. By showing results, instead of just talking about theories." That conversation changed everything. Instead of trying to convince my father that sustainable construction was viable, I decided to focus on learning everything I could about making it profitable. I spent weekends in the library, researching case studies of successful green building projects. I learned about tax incentives for sustainable development, about materials that were both environmentally friendly and cost-effective, about energy systems that could dramatically reduce operating expenses. During my sophomore year, I joined a student organization called Engineers for Environmental Action. We worked on real projects with local nonprofits and community organizations, applying classroom theories to actual problems. Our first major project was designing an affordable housing development for a neighborhood organization in Somerville. The existing plans called for standard construction methods that would have created units with high utility costs and poor energy efficiency. Working with 3 other students, I developed an alternative proposal that used sustainable materials and energy-efficient systems. The numbers were compelling. Our design would cost 8% more upfront, but would save residents an average of $1,500 per year in utility bills. Over the lifetime of the building, the sustainable approach would be significantly more affordable for the families who would live there. When we presented our proposal to the neighborhood organization, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This is exactly what we need," said Maria Santos, the organization's director. "Affordable housing shouldn't mean expensive living. These families deserve efficient, healthy homes." For the first time in my life, adults were taking my ideas seriously. They weren't dismissing my suggestions as impractical or naive. They were asking detailed questions about implementation, about timelines, about how to find contractors who could execute the sustainable design elements. The project took 18 months to complete, and I volunteered as a liaison between the student team and the construction crews. I learned about the practical challenges of sustainable construction, how to find suppliers for eco-friendly materials, how to train workers on new installation techniques, how to navigate building codes that hadn't caught up with innovative building methods. But I also saw the results. The completed building was beautiful, efficient, and affordable. The families who moved in were thrilled with their lower utility bills and healthier indoor air quality. The project received coverage in the local paper and attracted interest from other community organizations. More importantly, it attracted attention from developers who were starting to understand that sustainable construction wasn't just about environmental responsibility, it was about long-term profitability. During my junior year, I was approached by Amanda Foster, a developer who had read about our Somerville project. She was planning a small commercial development in Cambridge and wanted to explore sustainable options. "I'll be honest," she told me over coffee near campus, "I don't care about saving the planet. But I do care about saving money and attracting tenants who will pay premium rents for efficient spaces. Can you help me understand how sustainable design could improve my bottom line?" Working with Amanda taught me how to translate environmental benefits into business language. Instead of talking about carbon footprints, I focused on reduced operating costs. Instead of emphasizing ecological impact, I highlighted the marketing advantages of green certification. Her project became a case study in practical sustainability. We incorporated energy-efficient lighting and HVAC systems, used recycled and locally sourced materials where possible, and designed the building to maximize natural light and ventilation. The total additional cost was 12%, but the building achieved LEED Gold certification and attracted tenants willing to pay 15% above market rate for environmentally certified office space. More importantly, Amanda became an advocate. She referred other developers to me, and word began to spread about the MIT student who could make green building profitable. By my senior year, I was consulting on 3 different development projects while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I had proven, at least to myself and to a growing network of forward-thinking developers, that sustainable construction wasn't just environmentally responsible, it was financially smart. But the person I most wanted to convince remained skeptical. During my last visit home before graduation, I tried once more to share what I'd accomplished. "Dad, I want to show you something," I said, spreading out photos and financial reports from Amanda's project on the kitchen table. "This is a commercial development I helped design. It uses sustainable materials and energy systems, and it's generating higher rental income than comparable buildings." My father glanced at the papers without picking them up. "That's nice, Misha, but this is Cambridge. Different market, different customers. This wouldn't work in Hartford." But the principles are the same. Energy efficiency saves money everywhere. Sustainable materials can reduce maintenance costs anywhere. Carlos, who had been quietly eating breakfast, looked up from his phone. "Elena, you did good work in school, but now you need to think about real career options. Dad could probably find you a position in our admin department, or maybe you could work with our architects on interior design elements." The stone in my stomach grew heavier. Even after 4 years of proving my ideas could work, after demonstrating that sustainable construction could be profitable, they still saw me as the dreamer who needed to be gently guided toward more practical pursuits. That night, lying in my childhood bed for what I somehow knew would be the last time, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep trying to convince them. I wasn't going to accept a consolation prize position at Rodriguez Construction. I was going to build my own company, prove my ideas in the marketplace, and let success speak louder than any argument I could make. I just had no idea that 5 years later, I'd be in a position to hand my father the keys to his own company. Graduation day at MIT should have been a celebration. As I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing I was about to jump, but not entirely sure where I'd land. My parents had driven up from Hartford for the ceremony. Mom cried when they called my name, and Dad clapped politely, but I could see the question mark in his eyes. Now what? What do you do with a degree in environmental engineering when your family's construction company has no use for environmental engineers? The answer came sooner than I expected, but not from where I thought it would. 2 days after graduation, I was packing up my dorm room when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Boston area code. Elena Rodriguez? This is David Chen from Brookline Development Group. Amanda Foster gave me your contact information. I understand you've been consulting on sustainable construction projects. David explained that his company was planning a mixed-use development in downtown Boston, retail space on the ground floor, offices above, residential units on the top 3 floors. The city was offering significant tax incentives for projects that achieved LEED certification, but David's team had no experience with green building standards. Amanda showed me the financial analysis you did for her Cambridge project, he said. We're looking at a much larger scale, $42 million development, and we need someone who understands both the environmental requirements and the business implications. Would you be interested in consulting on the project? I nearly dropped the phone. A $42 million project. Amanda's development had been $2 million. I should mention, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I just graduated. I don't have years of professional experience. Amanda said, you have something better than experience. You have vision and the ability to make it profitable. Are you interested or not? 3 hours later, I was sitting in David's downtown Boston office, looking at architectural renderings and financial projections that made my head spin. The Brookline Harbor project was massive. A full city block that would house 120 residential units, 30,000 square feet of office space, and ground floor retail that would create a new neighborhood hub. The traditional approach would cost us about $38 million, David explained, pointing to a thick folder of contractor bids. But we'd miss out on nearly $4 million in city tax incentives, and we'd have higher operating costs that would make the residential units harder to sell and the office space less attractive to tenants. I spent the next 6 hours reviewing every detail of the project: supply chains, material costs, energy systems, building codes, environmental regulations. By the time I left David's office that evening, I had a preliminary plan that could save the development $2 million in operating costs over 10 years, while qualifying for the full tax incentive package. I'll need 2 weeks to put together a comprehensive proposal, I told him. You have 1 week, he replied. We're presenting to investors next Friday. I spent that week living on coffee and determination. I contacted every supplier, contractor, and specialist I'd worked with during my MIT projects. I researched new technologies, ran financial models, and created a presentation that would either launch my career or end it before it started. The presentation went better than I'd dared to hope. David's investors weren't just impressed, they were excited. The sustainable design elements wouldn't just save money, they would make the project more marketable to environmentally conscious tenants and buyers. Elena, David said after the investors left, how would you feel about taking this from consulting to full-time? We want you to oversee all sustainable design elements for this project and potentially others. The offer was generous. More money than I'd expected to make in my first 5 years out of college, equity in the development company, and the chance to implement sustainable design on a scale I'd only dreamed about. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with Professor Mitchell during my senior year. The hardest part about being an innovator, she'd told me, isn't convincing people your ideas work. It's deciding whether to join existing organizations and change them from within, or to build something new from the ground up. That night, I called my parents to tell them about the job offer. I expected excitement, or at least relief that their environmental engineering daughter had found a way to make a living. Boston? My mother said, her voice tight with concern. Maisha, that's so far from home. It's only 2 hours, Mom, and it's an incredible opportunity. My father took the phone. Elena, this sounds like a good position, but you should consider your long-term goals. Working for someone else's company, you'll always be an employee. Carlos is about to become a partner at Rodriguez Construction. There's still time for you to come home and build something with your family. Dad, I appreciate that, but this isn't just a job. It's a chance to prove that sustainable construction can work on a large scale. The project I'd be working on is bigger than anything Rodriguez Construction has ever built. Size isn't everything, mija. Security matters. Loyalty matters. This developer in Boston, he doesn't know you. He doesn't care about your future the way your family does. After I hung up, I sat in my empty dorm room. Jessica had already left for her new job in Silicon Valley, and tried to figure out why I felt so conflicted about an opportunity that should have been everything I wanted. The answer came to me the next morning when David called to ask if I'd made a decision. David, I'm incredibly grateful for the offer, and I think Brookline Development is doing important work. But I need to ask you something. After this project, what's next? More consulting on other people's visions? More implementation of sustainable elements within traditional development frameworks? There was a pause. Elena, I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm asking whether this position would give me the chance to really innovate, or whether I'd be making other people's projects slightly greener. This is a $42 million development. You'd be overseeing millions of dollars in sustainable design decisions. But they'd still be your decisions, ultimately. Your vision, your risk, your profit. Another pause. Are you saying you don't want the job? I'm saying I think I need to build my own company. The words surprised me as much as they surprised David. I hadn't consciously decided to start my own firm, but saying it out loud made something click into place. Elena, with respect, you just graduated college. Starting a development company requires experience, capital, connections, credibility. This industry doesn't hand opportunities to 22-year-old entrepreneurs. Then maybe it's time for the industry to change. That conversation launched the most terrifying and exhilarating 6 months of my life. I turned down David's offer and moved to a studio apartment in Somerville. Cheap rent, close to my old MIT network, far enough from Hartford that I couldn't be tempted to retreat to family safety when things got difficult. And things got difficult immediately. I named my company Verde Development, registered as an LLC, and opened a business bank account with the $3,000 I'd saved from my MIT consulting work. I spent my days in coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, cold calling property owners, researching potential development sites, and trying to convince anyone who would listen that a recent college graduate could manage a sustainable construction project. The rejections came fast and often. Landlords who hung up when I mentioned sustainable design. Investors who laughed at my age. Contractors who assumed I was someone's assistant and asked to speak to my boss. But I also started to find people who were intrigued by what I was offering. Small property owners who were tired of high utility bills. Community organizations looking for affordable housing solutions. Young professionals who wanted to live and work in environmentally responsible buildings. My first real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My MIT alumni network. Professor Mitchell had forwarded my contact information to Rachel Kim, a recent MIT graduate who had inherited a small apartment building in Cambridge from her grandmother. The building is solid but outdated, Rachel explained when we met at a cafe near her property. High heating bills, old windows, inefficient appliances. My grandmother's tenants have been there for years, and I don't want to raise rents. But I also can't afford to keep subsidizing their utility costs. I spent a week analyzing Rachel's building and developing a renovation plan that would reduce energy costs by 60% while improving living conditions for existing tenants. The initial investment would be substantial, nearly $100,000, but the energy savings would pay for themselves in 5 years, and the improvements would allow Rachel to gradually raise rents to market levels without displacing long-term tenants. The problem, Rachel said after reviewing my proposal, is that I don't have $100,000. Then we find investors who do. Who's going to invest in a project managed by two 20-something women with no track record? It was a fair question, and the answer came from another unexpected direction. During a networking event for young entrepreneurs, I met Marcus Washington, a real estate investor who specialized in small-scale urban development projects. Marcus was different from the traditional developers I'd encountered. He was 35, had grown up in inner-city Detroit, and had built his investment portfolio by focusing on projects that benefited communities instead of just generating maximum profit. "I've been looking for someone who understands sustainable design," he told me after I'd pitched Rachel's project. "Not because I'm an environmentalist, but because energy-efficient buildings make better investments. Lower operating costs, higher tenant retention, better resale values. Marcus agreed to finance Rachel's renovation in exchange for a partnership stake in Verde Development. It wasn't the arrangement I'd originally envisioned. I'd hoped to maintain complete control of my company, but it gave me the credibility and capital I needed to prove my concepts could work in the real world. The renovation took 4 months and came in under budget. Rachel's tenants saw their utility bills drop by an average of $200 per month. The building's value increased by 30%. Marcus made back his investment plus profit, and Verde Development established a track record of successful sustainable renovations. More importantly, word began to spread. Rachel referred other small property owners. Marcus introduced me to his network of investors. Professor Mitchell connected me with MIT students who were looking for real-world experience with sustainable design. By the end of my first year in business, Verde Development had completed 6 renovation projects and was planning our first new construction development, a small mixed-use building in Somerville that would demonstrate sustainable design principles on a larger scale. I was proud of what we'd accomplished, but I also knew I was still playing in the minor leagues. 6 renovation projects was impressive for a startup, but it was nothing compared to Rodriguez Construction's annual revenue. My father was building shopping centers and office complexes while I was retrofitting apartment buildings and designing small residential developments. The gap between my ambitions and my achievements felt enormous. But I was learning something my father had never taught me: that sustainable success isn't built overnight. It's built project by project, relationship by relationship, innovation by innovation. And I was also learning that sometimes the most important victories aren't the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're the ones that prove to yourself that you're capable of more than anyone else believed possible, including your own family. Year 2 of Verde Development was when I learned the difference between having a vision and building a business. The romantic notion of being an entrepreneur, working from coffee shops, making passionate pitches to investors, changing the world one sustainable building at a time, gave way to the brutal reality of cash flow management, permit applications, and 3 a.m. phone calls from contractors dealing with unexpected problems. My studio apartment had transformed into an improvised office. The kitchen table was covered with architectural drawings. The couch served as a filing cabinet for building permits. And my bedroom wall was covered with a massive timeline tracking 12 different projects in various stages of development. I'd wake up surrounded by building codes and fall asleep reviewing financial projections. Marcus had been right about one thing: credibility in construction comes from completing projects, not from good intentions. Every successful renovation and new construction project added weight to Verde Development's reputation, but it also revealed how much I still had to learn about the business side of sustainable development. Our breakthrough project came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a physician who ran a community health clinic in Roxbury, had purchased a vacant lot where she wanted to build a new facility. The existing clinic was cramped, energy inefficient, and located in a building with poor air quality that actually contributed to the health problems she was trying to treat. "I want a building that promotes healing," she told me during our first meeting. "Clean air, natural light, spaces that make patients feel hopeful instead of defeated. But I also need it to be financially sustainable. We're a nonprofit. We can't afford high operating costs." Dr. Walsh's project became our first ground-up commercial construction, and it taught me lessons no business school could have provided. Working with a healthcare facility meant navigating complex regulations I'd never encountered. Medical buildings require specialized HVAC systems, specific electrical configurations, and building materials that meet strict safety standards. More challenging was the budget. Dr. Walsh had secured a grant from the state health department and loans from 2 community development financial institutions, but the total funding was barely enough for traditional construction, let alone the sustainable features that would make the building truly innovative. I spent weeks researching alternative funding sources and discovered a federal tax credit program for energy-efficient commercial buildings that could cover 30% of our sustainable design costs. The catch was that the building had to achieve specific energy performance standards that no healthcare facility in Massachusetts had ever met. "Elena," Marcus said when I explained the tax credit requirements, "this is a huge risk. If we don't hit those performance standards, we lose the tax credit, and the project becomes unprofitable. But if we do hit them, we create a model that every healthcare facility in the region will want to replicate. The Roxbury Health Center became our masterclass in innovative problem solving. We used locally sourced materials to reduce transportation costs and support regional suppliers. We installed a geothermal heating and cooling system that eliminated the need for traditional HVAC equipment. We designed the building to maximize natural light while minimizing heat gain, reducing both lighting costs and cooling expenses. The most innovative feature was an integrated air filtration system that not only met medical facility requirements, but actually improved air quality beyond what most hospitals achieved. We partnered with a MIT research team to test and document the system's performance, creating data that would eventually influence healthcare building standards throughout New England. Construction took 8 months, 2 months longer than originally planned, but still within budget. When the building opened, it achieved LEED Platinum certification and exceeded the energy performance standards required for the federal tax credit. More importantly, Dr. Walsh's staff and patients immediately noticed the difference. The air quality alone has reduced respiratory complaints by 30%, Dr. Walsh told me 6 months after opening. And our utility bills are 60% lower than our old facility. But the biggest change is how people feel when they walk into the building. It feels like a place where healing happens. The Roxbury Health Center attracted attention from healthcare administrators, environmental groups, and development professionals throughout the region. Verde Development was featured in a Boston Globe article about innovative healthcare construction, and I was invited to speak at a conference on sustainable medical facilities. More practically, the project led to 3 new contracts with healthcare organizations and established Verde Development as a specialist in energy-efficient medical construction. But success brought new challenges. With 6 active projects and a growing team, I'd hired 2 full-time staff members and was working with a network of specialized contractors. I was struggling to maintain the personal touch that had made Verde Development different from larger construction companies. I was also learning about the politics of the construction industry. Established firms didn't appreciate a young woman with MIT credentials winning contracts they felt entitled to bid on. Some contractors tried to charge Verde Development premium rates because they assumed we were inexperienced. Others questioned my technical knowledge in front of clients, testing whether I really understood load calculations and building codes. The most frustrating incident happened during a project meeting for a mixed-use development in Cambridge. I was presenting our sustainable design proposal to a group that included the property owner, the lead contractor, and representatives from the city planning department. Halfway through my presentation about innovative stormwater management systems, the contractor, a man in his 50s who'd been building in Cambridge for 20 years, interrupted me. "Sweetheart, this all sounds very interesting, but have you actually calculated the structural requirements for this drainage system? These aren't theoretical problems. This is real construction." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see whether the young woman with the fancy ideas could handle being challenged by an industry veteran. I walked to the whiteboard and spent the next 15 minutes working through every structural calculation, soil analysis, and hydraulic engineering requirement for the stormwater system. I explained how the integrated design would actually reduce foundation costs while improving the building's resilience to flooding. I answered every technical question the contractor raised and several he hadn't thought to ask. When I finished, the property owner looked directly at the contractor. "Do you have any other concerns about Ms. Rodriguez's technical qualifications?" The contractor shook his head, but I could see the resentment in his eyes. I'd won the technical argument, but I'd also made an enemy who would be looking for ways to prove that Verde Development wasn't ready for serious projects. That confrontation taught me an important lesson about operating in a traditional industry as a young innovator. Technical competence wasn't enough. I needed to be better prepared, more knowledgeable, and more professional than anyone else in the room, not because it was fair, but because it was necessary. I started spending my evenings studying building codes, researching new construction technologies, and networking with suppliers and subcontractors who were interested in sustainable construction methods. I joined the Boston Society of Architects, attended every relevant conference and trade show, and gradually built relationships with industry professionals who respected expertise over assumptions. The effort paid off when Verde Development was invited to bid on our largest project yet, a 40-unit affordable housing development in Dorchester. The Massachusetts Housing Partnership was looking for a developer who could create high-quality, energy-efficient housing for families earning less than 60% of the area median income. The project requirements were challenging. The housing had to be affordable for low-income families, energy-efficient enough to keep utility costs low, and durable enough to require minimal maintenance over time. The developer also had to demonstrate experience with affordable housing regulations and community engagement processes. Verdi Development had never built 40 units of anything. Our largest project had been a 12-unit residential building, but we had something most affordable housing developers lacked: a proven track record of creating energy-efficient buildings that reduced long-term costs for residents. I spent 3 weeks preparing our proposal, working with Marcus to develop a financial model that would allow us to build high-quality units while maintaining affordability. We proposed a design that would reduce residents' utility bills by 70% compared to typical affordable housing, saving families an average of $1,500 per year. The key innovation was an integrated building system that combined solar panels, high-efficiency heating and cooling, and smart energy management technology. The upfront costs were higher than traditional construction, but the energy savings would more than offset the additional investment over the life of the building. We also proposed a community engagement process that would involve future residents in design decisions and create opportunities for local hiring during construction. When the Massachusetts Housing Partnership announced that Verdi Development had won the contract, I felt like I'd crossed a threshold. 40 units of affordable housing represented more than just a business success. It was proof that sustainable design could work at scale, that environmental responsibility and social justice could reinforce each other, and that a small company with innovative ideas could compete with established developers. The Dorchester project also brought Verdi Development to the attention of larger investors and institutional clients. Within 6 months of breaking ground, we had preliminary discussions with 3 other housing authorities and 2 private developers interested in sustainable construction projects. But the project that would change everything was still a year away. It would come from a source I never expected and challenge me to think beyond individual buildings to entire communities. It would also bring me to the attention of someone who had been watching Verdi Development's growth with increasing interest: my own father. Carlos had mentioned during a family dinner that Rodriguez Construction was losing bids to, quote, some environmental company that was undercutting their prices on energy-efficient projects. He didn't realize he was talking about his sister's company, and I didn't tell him. Not yet. I was building something that would eventually eclipse Rodriguez Construction's reputation for innovation and community impact. But first, I had to prove that Verdi Development could handle projects large enough to compete with established firms like my father's company. That opportunity was coming sooner than I realized. By year 3, Verdi Development had outgrown my studio apartment, my kitchen table, and my ability to manage every detail personally. We moved into a renovated warehouse space in Somerville. Ironically, a building we'd retrofitted the previous year for energy efficiency, and I hired our first full-time project manager, Sarah Kim, a MIT architecture graduate, who shared my passion for sustainable design but had better organizational skills than I'd ever possess. The warehouse office reflected everything Verdi Development had become: open, collaborative, filled with natural light, and powered entirely by renewable energy. We had a fabrication space where we could prototype building components, a conference room with walls covered in project timelines, and a break area that doubled as a brainstorming zone where our best ideas seemed to emerge over coffee and hand-drawn sketches. What I hadn't expected was how success would change the types of projects we were asked to consider. Instead of small property owners looking for energy-efficient renovations, we were fielding calls from major developers, institutional investors, and municipal housing authorities who wanted Verdi Development to scale our sustainable design principles to much larger developments. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing architectural drawings for a community center in Malden when Sarah transferred a call from someone named Patricia Holloway with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm calling about a development opportunity in Hartford that might interest your company. We're soliciting proposals for a mixed-income housing community that will be the largest sustainable development project in Connecticut's history. Hartford. My hometown. The city where Rodriguez Construction had built its reputation over decades of traditional development projects. Patricia explained that the state had acquired a 40-acre former industrial site in Hartford's North End and was planning to transform it into a model sustainable community. 250 residential units ranging from affordable housing to market-rate condominiums, 30,000 square feet of commercial space, community facilities, and green infrastructure that would demonstrate innovative approaches to urban sustainability. The total project value is estimated at $85 million, Patricia continued. We're looking for a development team with proven experience in sustainable construction, community engagement, and mixed-income housing. Your work on the Dorchester project and the Roxbury Health Center has impressed our review committee. $85 million. The largest project Rodriguez Construction had ever completed was $12 million. Ms. Holloway, I'm honored that you'd consider Verde Development for a project of this scale, but I should be transparent about our capacity. We've never managed a project larger than $6 million. We understand that. We're not looking for the largest developer, we're looking for the most innovative one. This project is designed to be a model for sustainable community development throughout New England. We need a team that thinks differently about how buildings and communities can work together. She sent me the request for proposals that afternoon, and I spent the next week studying every detail. The Hartford Sustainable Community Project wasn't just about building energy-efficient housing. It was about creating a new model for urban development that integrated affordable housing, environmental sustainability, economic opportunity, and community resilience. The site had significant environmental challenges: soil contamination from decades of industrial use, proximity to a floodplain, limited public transportation access. But it also had incredible potential. Located just 2 miles from downtown Hartford, the development could demonstrate how sustainable design could revitalize urban neighborhoods while providing quality housing for families across the economic spectrum. More intriguingly, the project requirements specifically called for innovative approaches to community energy systems, stormwater management, and local economic development. Everything Verde Development had been experimenting with on smaller projects could be implemented at scale. The only problem was that Verde Development didn't have the financial capacity or institutional experience to manage an $85 million development alone. We needed partners, established firms that could provide capital, bonding capacity, and project management experience for large-scale construction. That's when I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of partnering with a Boston development firm, I decided to approach Rodriguez Construction. The idea seemed insane at first. My father's company represented everything I'd rejected: traditional construction methods, profit over sustainability priorities, resistance to innovation. But Rodriguez Construction also had something Verde Development needed: deep experience with large projects, established relationships with Connecticut contractors and suppliers, and a reputation for completing complex developments on time and within budget. More importantly, I realized this could be an opportunity to prove that sustainable development wasn't just environmentally responsible, it was also more profitable and more beneficial to communities than traditional approaches. I called Carlos first. Of all my family members, he was most likely to consider a business proposal objectively, rather than emotionally. Elena? I haven't heard from you in months. How's the environmental consulting business going? It's going well, actually. Carlos, I'm calling because I have a business proposition that might interest Rodriguez Construction. I explained the Hartford project, emphasizing the scale, the prestige, and the potential for establishing Rodriguez Construction as a leader in sustainable development. I didn't mention that Verde Development would be the lead developer. $85 million? Carlos repeated. Elena, that's larger than anything we've ever bid on. And sustainable development. Dad's not exactly enthusiastic about environmental regulations. This isn't about regulations. It's about market demand. Mixed-income housing with energy-efficient design attracts higher-quality tenants, qualifies for tax incentives, and generates better long-term returns. The numbers work better than traditional development. Carlos was quiet for a moment. You'd really recommend Rodriguez Construction for a project this large? I think Rodriguez Construction could benefit from expanding into sustainable development. And I think this project could benefit from your experience with large-scale construction management. I'll talk to Dad about it. But Elena, if this is some kind of environmental activism disguised as a business proposal, it's not activism, Carlos, it's good business. 2 days later, my father called me directly. His voice was cautious, but intrigued. Elena, Carlos tells me you have information about a development project in Hartford, something about sustainable housing. It's a mixed-income community development, 250 units, commercial space, community facilities. The state is looking for an experienced Connecticut developer to lead the project. And you think Rodriguez Construction should bid on this? I think Rodriguez Construction should consider expanding into sustainable development. The market is moving in that direction, and established firms that adapt early will have significant competitive advantages. There was a long pause. Elena, I appreciate that you're thinking about family business opportunities. But sustainable development, that's not really our area of expertise. It could be. You have construction expertise. I have sustainable design expertise. Together, we could put together a proposal that combines Rodriguez Construction's project management experience with innovative environmental design. Another pause. You're suggesting we work together on this? I'm suggesting Rodriguez Construction could benefit from consulting with someone who understands sustainable development requirements. That phone call led to the most surreal week of my professional life. I drove down to Hartford and spent 3 days in the Rodriguez Construction offices, the same building where I'd spent childhood afternoons watching my father review blueprints and negotiate contracts, now analyzing the Hartford project proposal with my brother and father. The dynamic was strange and delicate. My father treated me with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism. Carlos was more open to the sustainable design elements but worried about implementation complexity. Neither of them fully understood that I wasn't just consulting on the project. Verde Development was planning to bid as the lead developer, with Rodriguez Construction as the general contractor. During those 3 days, I learned more about Rodriguez Construction's financial situation than I'd ever known. The company was stable, but not growing. Several recent bids had been unsuccessful, lost to competitors who offered lower prices or more innovative approaches. 2 major clients had specifically requested proposals for energy-efficient buildings, requirements that Rodriguez Construction couldn't meet without outside expertise. The market is changing, Carlos admitted during a private conversation in his office. Clients are asking about LEED certification, energy performance, sustainability measures. We've been treating it like a trend, but it's starting to affect our competitiveness. What does Dad think about that? Dad thinks it's temporary. That clients will come back to valuing reliability and cost-effectiveness over environmental features. But I'm not so sure. On my last day in Hartford, my father asked me to join him for lunch. We went to the same restaurant where he'd taken me for business lunches when I was a teenager, trying to interest me in the construction industry. Elena, he said after we'd ordered, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished with your environmental work. Carlos showed me some articles about your projects in Boston. Impressive results. Thank you, Dad. But I also want to be honest with you about this Hartford project. Rodriguez Construction has never managed a development this large or complex. Sustainable design adds layers of complexity that could create significant risks. If we bid on this project and something goes wrong, I understand the risks, but I also understand the opportunities. Sustainable development isn't just about environmental responsibility. It's about creating buildings that perform better, cost less to operate, and attract higher quality tenants. The financial benefits are substantial. And you really believe Rodriguez Construction could successfully manage this kind of project? I looked across the table at my father, the man who'd built a successful construction company from nothing, who'd taught me to value quality and reliability, who'd also dismissed my ideas for so many years. I believe Rodriguez Construction could learn to manage this kind of project, with the right partners and expertise. Partners like Verde Development? The question surprised me. I hadn't mentioned Verde Development's involvement during our discussions about the Hartford project. You know about Verde Development? My father smiled slightly. Elena, I may not understand environmental engineering, but I do understand the construction industry. Verde Development has been winning bids on projects that Rodriguez Construction used to compete for. I've been wondering when I'd meet the person behind the company that's been undercutting our prices with more efficient building designs. Dad, it's impressive work, Mija. I still don't agree with all your environmental priorities, but I can't argue with your results. Verde Development is building a reputation for innovation and reliability. That's not easy in this industry. So you know that Verde Development would be the lead developer on the Hartford project? I suspected. The question is whether you're offering Rodriguez Construction a partnership or just trying to hire us as a general contractor. It was a fair question, and the answer would determine not just the Hartford project, but the future relationship between Verde Development, Rodriguez Construction, and my family. I'm offering a true partnership, Dad. Verde Development brings sustainable design expertise and innovative financing. Rodriguez Construction brings large-scale project management experience and established contractor relationships. Together, we could build something neither company could accomplish alone. And if it doesn't work? If sustainable development turns out to be as impractical as I've always thought, then we'll have learned something valuable. But if it does work, if we create a model that other developers want to replicate, Rodriguez Construction becomes a leader in the fastest-growing segment of the construction industry. My father considered this while finishing his coffee. Elena, if we do this project together, you understand that it would be a real partnership? Rodriguez Construction wouldn't just be implementing your designs. We'd be equal partners in both the risks and the rewards. I understand. And you'd be working with your family as colleagues, not as the daughter with environmental ideas. I'd prefer that, actually. For the first time in years, my father looked at me with something that might have been respect. Then let's see if we can put together a proposal that wins this project. Walking out of that restaurant, I felt like I'd crossed another threshold. Verde Development was about to attempt the largest sustainable development project in Connecticut history, in partnership with the family company that had once dismissed my ideas as impractical dreams. But I also knew that success on the Hartford project would establish Verde Development as a major player in sustainable development throughout New England. And that kind of success might create opportunities I hadn't even imagined yet. The Hartford Sustainable Community Project consumed the next 18 months of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. What began as a partnership between Verde Development and Rodriguez Construction evolved into something more complex. A complete transformation of how both companies approach development, construction, and community engagement. The joint proposal we submitted was unlike anything either company had produced before. Verde Development's sustainable design expertise merged with Rodriguez Construction's project management experience created a comprehensive plan that impressed even the most skeptical members of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority Review Committee. We proposed a phased development that would transform the 40-acre industrial site into a model sustainable community over 4 years. Phase 1 included 75 residential units, a community center, and the environmental remediation of the most contaminated areas of the site. Phase 2 would add 100 more residential units and retail space. The final phase would complete the community with an additional 75 units and a small urban farm that would provide fresh produce for residents while demonstrating innovative urban agriculture techniques. The environmental design elements were ambitious but achievable. Every building would achieve LEED Gold certification or higher. A community-wide solar array would generate 60% of the development's energy needs. An innovative stormwater management system would transform the flood-prone site into a model of urban resilience. And a community energy management system would allow residents to share renewable energy resources and reduce individual utility costs. But the most innovative aspect of our proposal wasn't technological, it was social. We committed to hiring 30% of construction workers from the local community and providing apprenticeship programs that would train residents for ongoing maintenance and management positions. We also proposed a cooperative ownership model for some units that would allow low-income families to build equity while keeping housing affordable. When the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority announced that the Rodriguez Verde partnership had won the contract, the news coverage was extensive. The Hartford Courant ran a front-page story about the largest sustainable development project in state history. Construction industry publications highlighted the partnership between a traditional construction firm and an innovative sustainable design company. Environmental groups praised the project as a model for addressing both climate change and affordable housing challenges. What the media coverage didn't mention was how the partnership was changing both companies internally. Rodriguez Construction had never worked with architects and engineers who prioritized environmental performance alongside structural integrity. The company's longtime project managers had to learn new construction techniques, work with unfamiliar materials, and coordinate with specialized contractors who installed solar panels, geothermal systems, and high-efficiency building components. More challenging for my father and Carlos was adjusting to Verde Development's community engagement approach. Rodriguez Construction had always focused on satisfying clients and regulatory agencies. Verde Development insisted on involving future residents in design decisions, hosting community meetings to address concerns, and creating opportunities for local input throughout the construction process. This is taking twice as long as normal project planning, Carlos complained during one of our weekly coordination meetings. We've had 4 community meetings about playground design. The kids are going to be happy with any playground we build. The point isn't just to build a playground, I replied. It's to build community ownership and engagement. When residents are involved in design decisions, they're more invested in maintaining and improving the development long-term. My father, who had initially been skeptical of the community engagement requirements, gradually became one of its strongest supporters. During a community meeting where residents were discussing the design of common areas, he listened to a single mother explain how important it was for the playground to be visible from her apartment window so she could supervise her children while cooking dinner. "I never thought about how apartment layout affects family safety," he told me after the meeting. "We've been designing units for maximum square footage, but this woman is thinking about sightlines and community connection. She knows things about how families live that we never considered." The construction phase revealed other differences between traditional and sustainable building approaches. Rodriguez Construction's crews were accustomed to working with standard materials and proven techniques. Verde Development's specifications required learning new installation methods for unfamiliar products. Structural insulated panels instead of traditional framing, radiant floor heating instead of forced air systems, smart electrical panels that could integrate with renewable energy sources. The learning curve was steep, but the results were impressive. Energy performance testing showed that Phase 1 buildings were using 30% less energy than projected, which meant even lower utility costs for residents. Indoor air quality measurements exceeded health standards by significant margins, and construction waste was reduced by 40% compared to typical residential projects. More importantly, the project was attracting attention from developers, investors, and housing authorities throughout New England. Verde Development was fielding inquiries about similar projects in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine. Rodriguez Construction was being asked to bid on sustainable construction projects throughout Connecticut, but success was also creating tensions I hadn't anticipated. The partnership had been structured as a joint venture with shared decision-making authority, but Verde Development's expertise in sustainable design often meant I was making final decisions about technical specifications, material choices, and performance standards. Rodriguez Construction's crew foremen and project managers, who had been taking direction from my father and Carlos for years, were now implementing designs and methods developed by a company led by the boss's daughter. The dynamic was awkward for everyone. My father wanted to support the partnership, but struggled with having his authority questioned by subcontractors who weren't sure who was really in charge. Carlos was enthusiastic about the technical innovations, but frustrated by the additional complexity and oversight required for sustainable construction. The crew members respected my technical knowledge but weren't always comfortable taking direction from someone they remembered as the idealistic college student who used to visit construction sites with impractical suggestions. The tension came to a head during Phase 2 construction, when we encountered unexpected soil conditions that required modifying our foundation design. The change would add 2 weeks to the construction schedule and increase costs by $300,000. Rodriguez Construction's standard approach would have been to implement the most cost-effective solution and absorb the delay. Verde Development's priorities included maintaining the building's energy performance standards and ensuring that foundation modifications didn't compromise the integrated building systems. "Elena, we need to make a decision quickly," Carlos said during an emergency project meeting. Every day we delay costs money and we're already operating on tight margins. I understand the time pressure, but we can't compromise the building's performance standards. If we use traditional foundation methods, we'll lose the thermal efficiency that makes the heating system cost-effective. My father, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. This is exactly the kind of situation I was worried about when we started this partnership. Environmental priorities are creating delays and cost overruns that could jeopardize the entire project. Dad, the cost overrun is from unexpected soil conditions, not from environmental priorities. And the performance standards aren't optional. They're what makes this development financially viable for residents long-term. But if we can't complete the project on budget, there won't be any long-term benefits for anyone. The meeting ended without resolution, and I spent that evening walking around the partially completed development, trying to figure out how to balance Verde Development's principles with Rodriguez Construction's practical concerns. The solution came from an unexpected source. Marcus Washington, my original investor partner, who had been following the Hartford project with interest. "Elena," he said when I called him for advice, "you're thinking about this wrong. You're treating this like a conflict between sustainability and profitability. But it's actually an opportunity to demonstrate that sustainable solutions can be more cost-effective than traditional approaches." "How do you mean?" "Instead of using traditional foundation methods or expensive sustainable alternatives, why not develop a new approach that's both environmentally sound and economically efficient? You've got the engineering expertise, Rodriguez Construction has the construction experience, and you've got a project site where you can test innovative solutions." That conversation led to a breakthrough that transformed both the Hartford project and the relationship between Verde Development and Rodriguez Construction. Working with soil engineers and foundation specialists, we developed a hybrid foundation system that combined traditional construction reliability with innovative sustainability features. The new approach used recycled concrete aggregate mixed with local soil amendments to create foundations that were both structurally sound and thermally efficient. The material cost was lower than traditional concrete, installation time was faster than originally planned, and thermal performance exceeded our sustainability targets. More importantly, the innovation process required Verde Development and Rodriguez Construction teams to collaborate as true partners rather than separate companies trying to coordinate different priorities. This is the first time I've seen construction workers and environmental engineers solving problems together, my father observed, after watching our teams successfully implement the new foundation system. Usually, they're arguing about requirements and compromises. The hybrid foundation became a model that other projects began requesting. Rodriguez Construction filed for a patent on the installation technique, with Verde Development holding rights to the environmental performance specifications. Within 6 months, 3 other development projects in Connecticut were using variations of our foundation system. By the time Phase 2 was completed, the partnership had evolved into something neither company had originally envisioned. Rodriguez Construction had become Connecticut's leading contractor for sustainable construction projects. Verde Development had demonstrated the ability to manage large-scale developments while maintaining environmental performance standards, and both companies had developed expertise and reputation that made them attractive partners for innovative projects throughout New England. But the most significant change was personal. My father had become a genuine advocate for sustainable construction, not because he'd suddenly become an environmentalist, but because he'd seen that environmental responsibility could enhance, rather than compromise, business success. "Elena," he told me after Phase 2's grand opening ceremony, "I owe you an apology. When you first started talking about sustainable construction, I thought you were prioritizing idealism over practicality. I didn't understand that you were actually thinking more practically than I was, about long-term performance, community needs, and market trends that I wasn't seeing. Dad, you taught me that good construction is about solving problems and creating value. I just learned to think about different kinds of problems and value." As Phase 3 construction began, Verde Development was managing 12 other projects throughout New England, including 2 that were larger than the Hartford development. Rodriguez Construction was booked solid with sustainable construction contracts for the next 2 years. The partnership had not only succeeded, it had transformed both companies into leaders in their respective areas of expertise. But I was also becoming aware, that Verde Development's growth was creating opportunities that extended beyond construction and development. Institutional investors were approaching us about creating a sustainable development fund. Municipal housing authorities were asking Verde Development to consult on policy initiatives. Environmental organizations wanted to partner on advocacy campaigns. And then came the phone call that would change everything. Elena, this is Patricia Holloway from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. I have a proposition that might interest you. How would you feel about leading a statewide initiative to transform how Connecticut approaches affordable housing development? The opportunity she described was unprecedented. A $150 million program to create sustainable affordable housing throughout Connecticut, with Verde Development serving as the lead agency responsible for policy development, project oversight, and technical assistance to other developers. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that could establish Verde Development as a national leader in sustainable development. It was also the kind of opportunity that would require resources, expertise, and credibility that Verde Development had built over 5 years of proving that sustainable construction could be both environmentally responsible and financially successful. As I listened to Patricia describe the program, I realized that Verde Development had reached a point where we could begin to transform entire markets rather than just individual projects. But I also realized that success at this level would require making decisions about Verde Development's future that I wasn't prepared to make alone. Decisions that would affect not just my company, but my family, my community, and possibly the entire sustainable development industry in New England. The invitation arrived on thick cardstock with embossed gold lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate the retirement of Miguel Rodriguez after 35 years of building Connecticut's future. The date was set for a Saturday evening in June at the Hartford Country Club, the same venue where my parents had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary and where Carlos had held his wedding reception. I stared at the invitation for a long time, sitting in my Verde Development office as the late afternoon sun streamed through the energy-efficient windows we'd installed during our building renovation. 35 years. My father had built Rodriguez Construction from a one-man operation with a pickup truck into one of Connecticut's most respected construction companies. And now he was stepping away, handing control to Carlos, confident that the company he'd built would continue for another generation. What he didn't know was that I had just signed the paperwork to acquire Rodriguez Construction. The acquisition had begun 6 months earlier, not as a hostile takeover or a family power play, but as a solution to a problem that had been developing quietly for years. Rodriguez Construction's success with sustainable projects had brought new opportunities, but it had also revealed financial vulnerabilities that my father and Carlos had been reluctant to address. The company's traditional revenue model depended on high-volume, low-margin projects that required significant upfront capital investment. Sustainable construction projects were more profitable per unit, but they required specialized expertise, longer development timelines, and relationships with suppliers and subcontractors that Rodriguez Construction was still building. The tension came to a head when Rodriguez Construction was offered a $25 million sustainable office development in New Haven, the largest single contract in the company's history. The project would establish Rodriguez Construction as Connecticut's premier sustainable construction firm, but accepting it would require borrowing against the company's assets and hiring additional specialized staff. "It's too risky," my father had told Carlos during a family dinner in March. "One problem with a project that size, and we could lose everything I've built over 35 years. But Dad, if we don't take projects like this, we'll lose market share to companies that do. Verde Development is getting calls to partner on sustainable projects all over New England. We could be part of that growth. Or we could stick to what we know works. Reliable projects, manageable risk, steady profit." Carlos had called me the next day, frustrated and looking for advice. "Elena, I don't know how to convince Dad that we need to grow into sustainable construction, or we'll get left behind. He sees the opportunities, but he also sees the risks. And honestly, the risks are real. We don't have the capital reserves to survive a major project failure." That conversation led me to analyze Rodriguez Construction's financial position more carefully than I ever had before. The company was profitable but not growing. Assets were tied up in equipment and real estate that were appreciating slowly. Most importantly, the company's value was entirely dependent on my father's relationships and reputation, assets that couldn't be easily transferred to Carlos. Rodriguez Construction needed capital investment, technical expertise, and market positioning to compete in the evolving construction industry. Verde Development needed manufacturing capacity, local contractor relationships, and the credibility that came with 35 years of successful project completion. The solution was obvious, but implementing it required careful planning and discreet financial maneuvering that took months to arrange. Working with Marcus Washington and a private equity firm that specialized in construction industry investments, I structured a purchase agreement that would acquire Rodriguez Construction's assets while maintaining the company's operations and workforce. The deal included provisions for retaining Carlos as general manager and my father as chairman emeritus, positions that would allow them to continue leading daily operations while Verde Development provided strategic direction and capital investment. The key was ensuring that the acquisition would be presented as an opportunity for growth and security rather than a takeover. Rodriguez Construction would maintain its name, its office, and its project management approach. Verde Development would provide sustainable design expertise, access to larger projects, and the financial resources needed for expansion. The negotiation process was delicate because my father and Carlos didn't know Verde Development was the acquiring company. Marcus served as the front-facing buyer, representing what appeared to be a private equity firm interested in expanding into sustainable construction. The due diligence process, financial negotiations, and legal documentation were handled by third-party professionals who had no obvious connection to Verde Development. It was the most ethically complex business decision I'd ever made. I was essentially buying my family's company without their knowledge, justifying the deception by telling myself that the acquisition would benefit everyone involved. Rodriguez Construction would have the resources to grow. Carlos would have opportunities to lead major sustainable construction projects. My father would have financial security and the satisfaction of seeing his company thrive under new ownership. But I also knew that my family would feel betrayed when they learned the truth. My father had spent decades building Rodriguez Construction as an independent family business. Selling to what he believed was an outside investor was difficult enough. Learning that the buyer was his daughter would challenge everything he believed about family loyalty, business ethics, and his own legacy. The final papers were signed on a Thursday afternoon in the offices of Morrison Associates, the same law firm that had handled Rodriguez Constructions Incorporation 35 years earlier. Marcus signed as the representative of North Point Acquisition, LLC, the holding company we'd created to maintain Verde Development's anonymity until after the transaction was complete. "Mr. Washington," my father said as they shook hands after signing, "I want you to know that Rodriguez Construction has always been a family business. The employees, the clients, the community relationships, they're not just assets, they're responsibilities. I understand, Mr. Rodriguez, and I want to assure you that our plans for Rodriguez Construction include honoring those relationships while providing opportunities for growth that weren't possible as an independent company." Carlos was more direct. "What exactly are your plans for the company? Are you going to maintain current operations or restructure everything?" Marcus, following the script we'd rehearsed, explained that Rodriguez Construction would be integrated into a larger sustainable construction operation, led by an experienced team with a proven track record of profitable environmental projects throughout New England. "Actually," Marcus said, "you're probably familiar with our lead company. Verde Development has been Rodriguez Construction's partner on several recent projects." My father's eyebrows rose. "Verde Development is part of your investment group?" "Actually, Verde Development is our primary operating company. This acquisition will create the largest sustainable construction operation in Connecticut." I watched my father's expression change as he processed this information. He wasn't stupid. He understood immediately that Verde Development's involvement meant his daughter had been part of the acquisition process. "Elena?" he said, looking directly at Marcus. "Is Elena Rodriguez involved in this transaction?" Marcus looked at me, waiting for permission to reveal what my father had already figured out. "Yes, Dad. Verde Development is acquiring Rodriguez Construction. I'm acquiring Rodriguez Construction." The silence in the conference room was absolute. Carlos stared at me, with something between shock and admiration. My father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, anger, and something that might have been pride. "You bought my company," he said, finally. "I bought your company to save it." Rodriguez Construction needed capital investment and market positioning to compete with larger firms that are moving into sustainable construction. Verde Development needed manufacturing capacity and local relationships to handle larger projects. This acquisition benefits both companies. But you didn't tell us. You let us think we were selling to strangers. Because you never would have agreed to sell to me. You would have seen it as charity or family manipulation instead of a business decision that makes sense for both companies. Carlos found his voice. Elena, how is this possible? Verde Development is 5 years old. Rodriguez Construction has been profitable for 35 years. How do you have the capital to acquire a company this size? I explained Verde Development's financial position, the successful projects, the investment partnerships, the contracts that had established us as New England's leading sustainable development firm. I showed them our revenue projections, our client list, and our expansion plans that included Rodriguez Construction as a key component. Verde Development's annual revenue is currently 4 times larger than Rodriguez Construction's, I said. We're managing 12 active projects worth a combined $130 million. The Connecticut Housing Finance Authority has asked us to lead a statewide affordable housing initiative. We're not acquiring Rodriguez Construction because we need it. We're acquiring it because together, we can build something larger than either company could achieve independently. My father listened without interrupting. But I could see him processing not just the financial information, but the implications for everything he'd believed about his daughter's career choices. 35 years, he said quietly. I spent 35 years building Rodriguez Construction, and you've built something larger in 5 years. I built on what you taught me, about quality construction, about serving clients, about building relationships with contractors and suppliers. I just applied those principles to a different market segment. A market segment I told you was impractical. A market segment you helped me understand by showing me how construction really works. Everything I learned about project management, I learned by watching you. Everything I know about working with contractors, I learned from Carlos. Verde Development exists because Rodriguez Construction taught me how to build things that last. The room was quiet again as my father considered this. So what happens now? Carlos asked. What changes for Rodriguez Construction employees and operations? I had prepared for this question, but the answer was complex because it involved reshaping both companies around a shared vision that neither had originally planned. Short term, very little changes. Rodriguez Construction continues operating under the same name with the same management structure. Carlos continues as general manager. Dad continues as chairman if he wants to. The main difference is that we'll have access to Verde Development's client base and project pipeline. And long-term, we create the most innovative, sustainable construction operation in New England. Rodriguez Construction's manufacturing capabilities, combined with Verde Development's design expertise and client relationships. We hire more specialized workers, invest in new equipment, and take on projects that neither company could handle alone. My father was quiet for a long time, looking at the legal documents spread across the conference table. Elena, he said finally, I need to ask you something and I want an honest answer. Did you do this to prove something to your family? Or did you do it because it makes business sense? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Both, I said. I wanted to prove that sustainable construction could be profitable, and that the ideas you dismissed weren't just environmental activism. But I also did it because Rodriguez Construction is a good company that was struggling to adapt to market changes, and Verde Development needs the kind of operational capacity that Rodriguez Construction can provide. And the timing? Acquiring the company right before my retirement party? I smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I wanted to give you a retirement gift, the knowledge that Rodriguez Construction will continue growing for another 35 years. Carlos laughed. Elena, this is the most expensive retirement gift in family history. It's also the most practical one. My father stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Hartford, the same view he'd had from Rodriguez Construction's office for decades. You know what's funny? He said without turning around. I spent years worrying about whether Carlos could successfully take over the company. It never occurred to me that my daughter had already built something larger. He turned back to face me. I'm proud of you, Elena. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were building. That afternoon, I drove to the Hartford Country Club to make final arrangements for his retirement party. In 3 hours, I would stand in front of a room full of contractors, clients, and family friends who had known me as Miguel Rodriguez's idealistic daughter. And I would hand my father the keys to a company he'd thought he was selling to strangers. But first, I needed to prepare a speech that would explain how Verde Development's acquisition of Rodriguez Construction was actually the beginning of something larger than either company could have achieved alone. The Hartford Country Club looked exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over mahogany paneling, round tables draped in white linen, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course where my father had tried unsuccessfully to teach me to appreciate the game he loved. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the idealistic daughter sitting quietly while adults discussed business I supposedly didn't understand. Tonight, I was Elena Rodriguez, CEO of Verde Development and owner of Rodriguez Construction, about to address a room full of people who had watched my journey from dismissed dreamer to industry leader. The guest list read like a directory of Connecticut's construction and development community. General contractors who had worked with Rodriguez Construction for decades. Municipal officials who had approved countless Rodriguez projects. Suppliers who had built their businesses around my father's reputation for reliable partnerships. And scattered throughout the room, representatives from the sustainable development projects that had established Verde Development's reputation. I had spent the afternoon preparing 2 speeches. The first was a traditional tribute to my father's 35 years of building excellence, the kind of respectful acknowledgement expected at retirement celebrations. The second was the speech I actually planned to give, a story about how Rodriguez Construction's future would honor its past while embracing innovations that would carry the company into its next chapter of growth. My mother had arrived early to oversee final arrangements, elegant in a navy dress that complemented my father's charcoal suit. She moved through the room with the graceful efficiency of someone who had spent decades hosting business events, but I caught her glancing at me with something new in her expression, curiosity mixed with anticipation. "Misha," she said, approaching me as guests began arriving, "your father told me about this afternoon's meeting, about Verde Development and the acquisition. What did he say?" "He said that his daughter had taught him something about the difference between building structures and building futures." She paused, adjusting a flower arrangement on the head table. "He also said that you had turned his retirement into a beginning instead of an ending." Carlos arrived with his wife and 2 young children, and I watched him work the room with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in the construction industry. He stopped to talk with every major contractor, thanked longtime clients for their loyalty to Rodriguez Construction, and made sure to introduce Verde Development staff members to people they'd be working with in the months ahead. "Elena," he said, pulling me aside as more guests arrived, "I've been thinking about this afternoon, about what this acquisition means for both companies." "And what do you think it means?" "I think it means Rodriguez Construction gets to become the company it always had the potential to be, and Verde Development gets to prove that sustainable construction can work at the scale that really matters." He smiled. "I also think Dad finally understands that his daughter inherited more than just his stubbornness." The evening began with cocktails and the kind of industry networking that had surrounded me since childhood, conversations about project schedules, material costs, and regulatory changes that affect construction timelines. But tonight, many of those conversations included questions about sustainable design, renewable energy systems, and environmental performance standards that had once been considered specialty topics. "Elena, I hear Verde Development is consulting on a project in New Haven," said Jim Morrison, a contractor who had worked with Rodriguez Construction for 20 years. "My company is interested in learning more about sustainable construction methods. Think we could set up a training session?" Similar conversations happened throughout the cocktail hour. Established contractors wanting to understand green building techniques. Developers asking about LEED certification requirements. Municipal officials interested in sustainability standards for public construction projects. I realized that tonight wasn't just about celebrating my father's retirement. It was about introducing a new era of construction industry collaboration that combined traditional expertise with innovative approaches to environmental responsibility. When dinner was served, I found myself seated at the head table between my parents, looking out at a room filled with people who represented Connecticut's construction industry past, present, and future. The conversations around me ranged from nostalgic stories about Rodriguez Construction's early projects to detailed discussions about Verde Development's upcoming initiatives. "Miguel," said Robert Chen, the Hartford City Planning Director, "I've been following Verde Development's work on the North End housing project. The community engagement approach has been impressive. Are you planning to incorporate similar methods into Rodriguez Construction's future projects?" My father glanced at me before answering. "Roberto, I think Elena should answer that question." Verde Development's community engagement expertise is one of the reasons this partnership makes sense for both companies. It was a small moment, but significant. My father was deferring to my expertise in front of a room full of industry colleagues, acknowledging publicly that I had knowledge and experience that complemented his own. After dinner, Carlos stood to introduce the evening's program. "Tonight we're celebrating more than just Dad's retirement," he began. "We're celebrating 35 years of construction excellence and looking forward to the next chapter of Rodriguez Construction's story." He spoke about our father's journey from immigrant entrepreneur to respected industry leader, about the hundreds of projects that had shaped Hartford's development over 3 decades, and about the relationships that had made Rodriguez Construction a trusted name throughout Connecticut. "But tonight is also about transition," Carlos continued, "about how established companies can embrace innovation while maintaining the values that made them successful. Elena, would you join me up here?" I walked to the front of the room, looking out at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to genuinely interested in what I might say. "When I was growing up," I began, "I spent a lot of time on Rodriguez Construction job sites, watching my father solve problems that seemed impossible to everyone else, structural challenges that required creative engineering, budget constraints that demanded innovative solutions, timeline pressures that tested everyone's ability to coordinate complex operations." I could see my father listening intently, probably wondering where this speech was heading. What I learned from watching Rodriguez Construction was that good construction isn't just about following blueprints. It's about adapting to unexpected conditions, finding solutions that work within real-world constraints, and building relationships with people who share a commitment to quality results. The room was quiet, following my narrative with the kind of attention that indicated people were genuinely interested in what came next. 6 years ago, I started Verde Development because I believed sustainable construction could be more than just an environmental statement. I believed it could be better business, more efficient, more profitable, and more beneficial to the communities where we build. I paused, making eye contact with contractors and developers throughout the room. What I've learned over the past 6 years is that sustainable construction requires exactly the same skills my father taught me construction requires. Creative problem-solving when standard approaches don't work. Innovation when budgets demand efficiency. Collaboration when complex projects require coordinating multiple specialties. I turned to look at my father. "Dad, you taught me that construction is about building things that last. You just didn't realize that environmental responsibility would become part of building things that last." The room erupted in applause. But I wasn't finished. This afternoon, Verde Development completed the acquisition of Rodriguez Construction. This wasn't a takeover or a buyout. This was a merger between 2 companies that share the same commitment to construction excellence, but bring different expertise to solving modern building challenges. The applause stopped as people processed what I had just announced. I could see surprise, confusion, and curiosity on faces throughout the room. Rodriguez Construction brings 35 years of project management expertise, established contractor relationships, and a reputation for delivering quality results on time and within budget. Verde Development brings sustainable design capabilities, innovative financing solutions, and relationships with clients who prioritize environmental performance. I walked over to my father, who was standing beside his chair with an expression that mixed pride, surprise, and something that might have been relief. "Dad, 6 years ago you told me that environmental engineering wasn't a real career. Tonight, I want to give you the keys to a company that proves sustainable construction isn't just environmentally responsible. It's the future of profitable building." I handed him a small gift box that contained 2 sets of keys. One set was for the Rodriguez Construction offices, where he had worked for 35 years. The other was for Verde Development's headquarters, where he would now serve as chairman emeritus of the combined operation. These keys represent more than just building access, I continued. They represent the opportunity to build a construction company that honors everything Rodriguez Construction has accomplished, while embracing everything Verde Development has learned about building better. My father opened the box and looked at the keys for a long moment before speaking. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. 35 years ago, I started Rodriguez Construction because I wanted to build something that would last longer than my own career. I wanted to create opportunities for other people and contribute to communities that welcomed our family." He held up the Verde Development keys. "What I didn't understand until recently was that building something that lasts requires changing with the times while maintaining the values that made you successful in the first place." He turned to face the room. "My daughter has built a company that proves environmental responsibility and business success aren't competing priorities. They're complementary strategies for creating long-term value." The applause this time was sustained and enthusiastic. People weren't just being polite. They were responding to the possibility of what Rodriguez Construction and Verde Development could accomplish together. "But more than that," my father continued, "Elena has taught me that innovation doesn't mean abandoning experience. It means applying experience to new challenges and opportunities." He turned back to me. "Mija, I'm proud of what you've built with Verde Development, and I'm honored that you want to build the future with Rodriguez Construction." The rest of the evening became a celebration that felt more like a beginning than an ending. Contractors approached me with questions about sustainable construction training programs. Developers asked about Verde Development's project pipeline and how they could participate. Municipal officials wanted to discuss policy initiatives that would support sustainable development throughout Connecticut. More importantly, the conversations weren't just about business opportunities. They were about community impact, environmental responsibility, and the kind of construction projects that improve people's lives while protecting the environment. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the country club's terrace with my parents, looking out at the Hartford skyline that included dozens of buildings Rodriguez Construction had helped create. "Elena," my mother said, "I owe you an apology. For years I supported your father's concerns about your environmental interests because I was worried about your future financial security. I didn't understand that you were actually creating more security than any of us imagined. Mom, you were protecting me the only way you knew how, but you also taught me that families support each other through changes and challenges." My father put his arm around my shoulders. "You know what's funny? I spent so much time worrying about whether Rodriguez Construction would survive after my retirement. It never occurred to me that my daughter would ensure it thrived." 6 months later, the combined Rodriguez Verde operation had completed its first major sustainable construction project under the new partnership, a 60-unit affordable housing development in Bridgeport that achieved LEED Platinum certification while coming in under budget and ahead of schedule. Rodriguez Construction's crews had mastered sustainable construction techniques. Verde Development's project pipeline included 3 developments larger than anything either company had previously attempted. And Carlos had been promoted to president of construction operations, overseeing sustainable projects throughout New England. But the most significant change was personal. Family dinners now included discussions about innovative building techniques, community development strategies, and environmental policy initiatives. My ideas weren't dismissed as impractical. They were evaluated as business opportunities. "Elena," my father said during a recent Sunday dinner, "I have a question about the Springfield housing project. Do you think we should propose the same geothermal system we used in Hartford, or would solar thermal be more cost-effective?" It was a technical question about renewable energy systems, exactly the kind of topic that would have been dismissed as environmental nonsense 5 years earlier. Now it was a normal part of Rodriguez Construction project planning. Today, Verde Development and Rodriguez Construction operate as an integrated sustainable construction company that combines traditional building expertise with innovative environmental design. We're currently managing projects worth over $200 million throughout New England. We employ 85 people, including specialized workers trained in sustainable construction techniques, and we're planning to expand operations into New York and Maine. But more than that, we've proven that family businesses can evolve without losing their values. that environmental responsibility can enhance rather than compromise profitability, and that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Standing in the offices where my father built Rodriguez Construction, surrounded by architectural drawings for projects that will define sustainable construction throughout Connecticut, I think about the girl who was once dismissed for asking dangerous questions about why things couldn't be better. She didn't give up on her family. She just built something so undeniably successful that her family had to reconsider what was possible. And sometimes, that's exactly what it takes to change the world. One sustainable building, one innovative project, one converted skeptic at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.